I remember the exact moment my whole world crumbled. I was sitting at my small wooden desk, sipping on lukewarm coffee, when I opened the latest bank statement. At first, I thought there had been some kind of clerical error, maybe a missing digit or a delayed transaction. But as my eyes scanned line after line, my hands began to tremble. The numbers weren't adding up. Thousands of dollars, my dollars, were gone. You have to understand, this wasn't just money sitting idly in an account. This was years of sacrifice, years of missed parties, of double shifts, of carefully putting away every extra coin while my friends spent theirs on vacations and nights out. Every cent represented a piece of the future I had planned for myself. I could practically see the walls of my dream cafe, the menu I had sketched in notebooks since I was a teenager, the freedom I was building brick by brick. And now, those bricks had been stolen. As my heart pounded in my chest, I asked myself the same question over and over. Who could have taken it? My account was secure, my passwords were strong, and only one other set of people had access: my parents. But even in that moment, I refused to believe it. Parents don't do that to their child. Parents protect you, nurture you, and celebrate your victories. They don't strip away everything you've worked for. At least, that's what I used to believe. And then the phone rang. At first, I didn't pick it up. I was too busy replaying all my transactions in my head, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. But when I saw the caller ID, my stomach dropped. It was the bank. I pressed the phone to my ear, desperate for answers. But what I heard next shattered me more than the missing money ever could. The representative's tone was casual, as if this was just another routine confirmation call. They mentioned the recent withdrawal, the transfer of funds, and then, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, they said they had already spoken with my parents about it earlier that morning. My parents, not me, the account holder. Not me, the one who had built that savings from nothing. They had called my parents first, as if I were invisible, as if my money wasn't truly mine. It was in that moment I felt something inside me break. The betrayal wasn't just about the dollars stolen. It was about the trust I had invested. Trust that had been shattered in an instant. Imagine working your whole life, saving every single penny, only to find out the very people you trusted most were the ones who betrayed you. I thought I was prepared for life's struggles, but I wasn't prepared for this. And I'll tell you this much. The day the bank called my parents instead of me was the day everything shattered. But what they didn't know, what they could never have anticipated, was that their betrayal would ignite a fire in me. A fire that would burn hotter than their greed. That betrayal didn't just take my savings. It gave birth to my revenge. I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class family. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. We always had food on the table, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our heads. My parents worked hard to provide for us, and I respected them for that. But from a young age, I realized something important. If I wanted more out of life, I would have to build it myself. No one was going to hand it to me. I was always the responsible one. While other kids in school daydreamed about vacations or the latest gadgets, I daydreamed about independence. I wanted a future where I didn't have to depend on anyone else. I wanted to create something that belonged entirely to me. My parents often reminded me of the value of saving money, and I took their lessons to heart. In fact, I might have taken them more seriously than they ever intended. From the time I was 12 years old, I started saving. I delivered newspapers before sunrise, when most kids were still sleeping. I mowed lawns in the summer, shoveled snow in the winter, and babysat whenever I could. Every single dollar I earned went into a small envelope that I guarded like treasure. By the time I was old enough to get a real job, my habit of saving was already deeply ingrained. When I got older, it didn't stop there. I worked part-time jobs during school, sometimes 2 at a time. While my classmates were out celebrating weekends, going to concerts, or buying the latest fashions, I was quietly putting money into my account. I didn't see it as missing out. To me, every dollar saved was another brick in the foundation of the life I was building. I wasn't just saving money, I was saving my future. My dream was simple, but it meant everything to me. I wanted to open my own business, a cafe that would be more than just a place to grab coffee. I imagined it as a warm, inviting space where people could gather, study, laugh, or simply enjoy a quiet moment. I could see it so clearly in my mind. The tables, the decor, even the smell of fresh pastries in the air. That dream kept me going on the hardest days. And the truth is, I thought my parents were proud of me. They always praised my discipline. They bragged about me to relatives, saying how mature and focused I was compared to other kids my age. Their words fueled me. They made me believe I was on the right path. For years, I carried their praise like a badge of honor, believing it was genuine. But here's the painful part. What I didn't know back then was that those words were nothing more than a mask. They weren't praising me because they admired my discipline. They were watching, waiting. Every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I made, it was like they were tallying it up in their minds, biding their time. Little did I know, they weren't praising me. They were waiting for the right time to take what was mine. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I finally felt like my life was beginning to take shape. For years, I had been working, saving, and planning, and now those efforts were paying off. My savings account had grown into something I could genuinely be proud of. Over $60,000. It wasn't an inheritance, it wasn't a gift, and it wasn't luck. It was my sweat, my discipline, and my persistence poured into numbers on a screen. That account wasn't just money. It was proof that I could turn dreams into reality if I worked hard enough. Life itself felt steady, almost comfortable. I had landed a stable job that covered my expenses and still left me enough to keep adding to my savings. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me security, and that was enough for me. I wasn't looking for a luxury lifestyle or extravagant pleasures. I was focused, and I knew exactly what I was working toward. Every paycheck wasn't just income. It was a step closer to the future I envisioned. I rented a small but cozy apartment that gave me a sense of independence. It wasn't much, but to me, it was everything. I decorated it carefully, choosing colors and furniture that made me feel at home. It was my own space, away from the noise of family and obligations. Sometimes I would sit by the window in the evenings with a notebook, sketching plans for the cafe I wanted to open one day. I would imagine the layout, the counter, the tables by the window where customers could sip their coffee while reading. Those sketches became my motivation. Each drawing reminded me that my dream wasn't far away. And through all of this, I believed I had a safety net in the people I trusted most, my parents. I thought we were close. I thought we had a bond that couldn't be broken. They knew about my goals, they knew about my savings, and they always spoke as if they supported me. In fact, I trusted them so deeply that I even gave them emergency access to my account. To me, that decision was natural. They were my parents, after all. If anything happened to me, I wanted them to be able to handle things on my behalf. I never once considered the possibility that giving them that access could backfire. At that point in my life, I felt hopeful. My vision for the future was clear, and I had no reason to doubt the people around me. Every detail seemed to line up. A steady job, growing savings, supportive parents, and a dream that was slowly turning into something tangible. It felt like the foundation for the life I had always wanted was finally being built. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the calm I was living in wasn't real. It was just the silence before a storm that would change everything. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary morning. I woke up, got ready for work, and was about to head out when my phone rang. It was my bank. At first, I thought it was just a routine call, maybe a security check or a reminder about my account. But as soon as I picked up, I felt something was off. The representative on the line spoke as if we had already discussed something important. Then, with a casual tone, they said, "As we confirmed with your parents earlier." My stomach dropped. Confirmed with my parents? Why would my bank be speaking to my parents? I was the account holder. I was the one who had worked for every single cent in that account. My parents had nothing to do with it. Confused, I asked them to explain. That's when the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. Hay told me there had been a large withdrawal, tens of thousands of dollars. More than half of my savings was gone. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. My chest tightened as I replayed the words in my head. Half my savings. Gone. And not only that, the bank had spoken to my parents first, as if it was their money, as if I was just a bystander in my own life. As soon as I hung up, I confronted my parents. I needed answers. I needed some kind of explanation that could make sense of the nightmare unfolding in front of me. But instead of guilt or remorse, what I was met with was a shocking kind of casualness. They looked at me as if I was overreacting. They told me it was for the family's good. They said the money had been used where it was needed most, as though that should have been enough for me to accept it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked them how they could take something that wasn't theirs, something I had spent years building, without even asking me. And that's when they delivered the words that still echo in my mind to this day. "We raised you. You wouldn't have this money if not for us." In that moment, my heart broke. These weren't strangers. These weren't scammers or thieves. This was my own blood. The people I trusted more than anyone in the world. The very people who had taught me the value of saving. The ones I thought had supported my dreams. They were the ones who had taken everything from me. That day, I realized something I had never dared to consider before. To my parents, I wasn't really their daughter. I wasn't someone whose dreams or sacrifices mattered. To them, I was just a source of money, a bank they could dip into whenever they pleased. And once I saw the truth, I knew my life would never be the same again. And once I saw the truth, I knew my life would never be the same again. When I demanded that my parents return the money, they didn't even hesitate before refusing. It was as if they had rehearsed their response, as if my outrage was nothing more than an annoyance to them. They told me the money was already gone, already used. And then the truth came out. My father had poured it into his failing business, the same business he had been trying to keep afloat for years despite warning signs everywhere. And my mother? She had indulged herself, buying things she claimed she deserved after years of sacrifice. I stood there in disbelief, trying to make them see the reality of what they had done. I told them that money was my dream, my cafe, my life. But instead of guilt, instead of even the slightest hint of understanding, they laughed. They looked at me with pity, as if I were a child who didn't understand how the world worked. And then they said the words that cut deeper than the theft itself. "You're young. You'll earn again. Family comes first." Family comes first. That was their justification for destroying my future, for taking away the years of effort I had put into building something for myself. To them, my life, my sacrifices, my goals, none of it mattered, as long as their immediate needs were met. My trust shattered in that instant. I had always believed that no matter what, my parents would want the best for me. But standing there, hearing their words, I realized the best for them didn't include my happiness or my future. It only included their comfort, their pride, their convenience. What hurt even more was the reaction of the rest of my family. When I turned to my siblings, hoping someone would understand, I was met with more betrayal. Instead of support, they sided with my parents. They told me I was being selfish, that I should be grateful I even had money to give. They told me family needed me, and that my dream could wait. In their eyes, I wasn't someone who had been wronged. I was the one causing the problem by daring to speak up. I felt completely alone. The people I thought would stand by me, the ones I thought would help me fight for what was mine, had all turned against me. I was isolated, cornered, left with nothing but my broken trust and the ruins of the future I had worked so hard to create. But what they didn't understand was that their betrayal had lit something inside me. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would forgive, that I would move on quietly and accept the loss. They thought I would stay the obedient daughter who never questioned their choices. They were wrong. After everything happened, I hit the lowest point of my life. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by the silence that suddenly felt heavier than ever. The dreams I had nurtured for so many years felt like they were slipping out of my hands, dissolving into nothing. My cafe, my independence, my future, it all seemed shattered. I cried until my eyes were swollen, asking myself over and over, why me? Why would they do this to me? For days, I carried that weight. I went to work like a shell of myself, unable to focus, unable to feel the same drive that had once fueled me. Every time I thought of the years I had sacrificed, the nights I had worked late, the weekends I had skipped just to save a few more dollars, the pain became unbearable. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal. The people I had trusted the most had proven that my trust meant nothing to them. But as the days dragged on, something began to change inside me. I realized that the tears, the pain, and the despair weren't going to fix anything. They weren't going to bring my money back. And they certainly weren't going to restore the dignity that had been stripped away when my parents laughed at my dreams. That's when the clarity hit me. If my own parents could betray me so easily without shame or regret, then why was I still protecting them in my heart? Why was I holding on to the illusion that they deserved my silence, my loyalty, my obedience? If they could treat me like nothing more than a bank account, then I had no reason to treat them like sacred figures anymore. For the first time, I stopped seeing myself as their powerless child. I stopped seeing them as untouchable. And in that moment, I made a vow. I wasn't going to simply cry over what I had lost. I wasn't going to let them write the ending to my story. I was going to reclaim what was mine, not just the money, but my dignity, my self-respect, and my power. I remember whispering the words out loud, as if speaking them gave them weight. They wanted to play games with my future? Then let's play. But this time, the rules are mine. That was the turning point. That was the moment I stopped being their victim and started becoming their reckoning. My pain transformed into determination. My despair turned into strategy. And my silence, that would become the very thing that made my revenge strike harder. From that day on, I knew I wasn't going to wait for apologies or miracles. I was going to take back control, piece by piece. They thought they had crushed me, but what they had really done was awaken a part of me they didn't know existed. And soon, they were going to find out exactly what that meant. Once I decided I wasn't going to be broken, I treated my plan like a job. The first thing I did was gather evidence. I spent nights pulling up old bank statements, tracing every deposit and withdrawal until the pattern made sense. I printed call logs, saved emails, and copied withdrawal authorizations. Piece by piece, I assembled a timeline that showed exactly when the money left my account and where it went. Details that had felt like random cruelty started to form a clear picture. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I also started listening more than speaking. In family gatherings, I let them celebrate and brag, and I recorded conversations when they slipped into boasting. My parents talked like they had nothing to hide, how they fixed Dad's business, how they had to buy things after years of sacrifice. Those offhand comments, when paired with the bank records, were poison to their story. I saved them. I labeled every file, time-stamped every recording, and backed everything up in a place they would never look. Once I had the receipts of their betrayal, I moved to build legal leverage. I consulted a lawyer under the cover of a fictitious name at first, just to understand my options. The law was clearer than I had hoped. Because they weren't joint account holders, and I had not signed anything authorizing that withdrawal, the transfer could be classified as unauthorized, fraud, embezzlement in plain terms. Knowing the language of the law gave me a weapon I hadn't had when I was crying alone in my apartment. I learned which documents would make a judge listen and which procedural boxes I needed ticked to make the bank take this seriously. But law alone wasn't enough. I needed an emotional strategy that would strip their social armor away. At home, I put on an act of resignation. I let them think I was broken, defeated, that their words and actions had succeeded. I smiled when they boasted. I spoke quietly about rebuilding slowly, like someone whose hope had been carefully extinguished. Their arrogance grew. They relaxed. They began to make careless remarks in front of relatives and neighbors, convinced I had no fight left. Then I opened social exposure. I didn't go full scorched earth all at once. I leaked carefully chosen facts to a few trusted cousins and friends, people whose reactions would ripple through the family like wildfire. I shared the recordings with one or two relatives who had influence and a sense of justice. I let stories spread, whispers about parents who had taken their daughter's savings, rumors that made polite relatives frown and take sides. The narrative shifted from me being a problem child to then being fallible, exposed. Throughout it all, I kept the real killer cards hidden, the ones that would destroy them if played at the right moment. I wasn't just planning to take back my money. I was planning to take away the privileges they had always enjoyed: respect, reputation, and the assumption that family loyalty meant unquestioned access to my life. They had assumed I was powerless. They had no idea the quiet, meticulous storm I was building. But I wasn't just planning to take back my money. I was going to take everything they valued most. The plan finally moved from paper to reality the night I called the family together. I told them it was just a small dinner, nothing more, and they came with smiles and smugness, convinced the situation had blown over. I watched them settle into their seats, heard the clink of cutlery, and felt how calm they were. Exactly how I had wanted them, unguarded, unaware that the night would change everything. I started by speaking quietly, reminding everyone of the good times, softening the room so my words would land harder when I shifted. Then I played the first recording. It began awkwardly, the same casual boasting I had captured, my parents laughing about the purchases, my father describing how they had helped the family by using my savings. For a moment, there was only the flat sound of speakers and my own breath. Then the room reacted. A cousin made a small noise. Someone asked, "Is that?" And then I played the next clip, clearer, bolder, where my mother joked about how easy it was to withdraw funds because she had access. Silence hit like a physical thing. Faces went pale. My parents' smugness drained away. The gasps were deafening. People who had once praised my parents now stared at them with the same shock I had felt months earlier. They tried to talk over the recordings, to spin explanations, but the evidence spoke for itself. The dinner ended in chaos. Some relatives left without a word, others demanded answers. My parents looked at me like I had stabbed them, but the betrayal in their eyes had already been exposed. After that night, the legal process moved quickly. My lawyer filed the complaint, and within days, I began receiving copies of court papers and official letters. Formal language that felt like a vindication of all the nights I had spent assembling proofs. When the bank opened its investigation, they froze my parents' access to their accounts pending the outcome. I watched as that small, quiet power they had wielded so casually began to unravel in administrative stamps and legal deadlines. News travels in small towns and tight-knit families, and mine was no different. Neighbors who once waved at them in the street now crossed to the other side. Relatives who had been their allies began to distance themselves. Uncomfortable at being connected to that kind of story, invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls went unanswered. Their social life, something they had clung to, started to collapse. People I had once seen as observers now became witnesses to their downfall. Financially, the consequences were swift. The bank's investigation flagged irregularities that damaged my parents' credit standing. Automatic payments bounced. Lines of credit were pulled. The same people who had joked about money now watched as statements turned red, and the courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound loud. My parents sat across from me, their lawyers whispering hurried strategies, while relatives and community members filled the benches, waiting to hear the outcome. Everyone already knew the scandal. They were there to witness the final blow. The judge asked for my testimony, and I stood. My voice was steady, but inside, I felt the weight of years. Every part-time job, every skipped outing, every dream I had poured into my savings. I began by confirming what the evidence already proved. The unauthorized withdrawals, the recordings of their bragging, the financial trail. My parents looked uncomfortable, but still tried to act defiant, as if they had a moral right to my sacrifice. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I paused, let the courtroom lean into the quiet, and then I said, what my parents— There was a ripple across the room. Lawyers glanced up, confused. My parents frowned, unsure of what I meant. That was when I revealed it. Years earlier, I had opened a second secret account. It had been my personal safety net, something I never shared with anyone, not even my closest friends. I explained how I had funneled the bulk of my earnings into that hidden account, keeping only a smaller portion in the one they had access to. The room shifted. A collective gasp rose from the benches, followed by murmurs of disbelief. The judge raised a hand for order, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of surprise. I turned toward my parents and delivered the numbers clearly, letting each digit land like a hammer. $80,000, safe, untouched, untouchable. Their faces drained of color. For months, they had walked around smug, believing they had destroyed my future. But in reality, they had only embarrassed themselves, exposing their greed to everyone. They had sacrificed their reputation, their standing in the community, and their financial stability, all for half of what they thought was the prize. The humiliation was written on their faces. My father's jaw tightened, his shoulders slumped. My mother's eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for sympathy, but finding only judgmental stares. The same relatives they had once bragged to now stared back with pity, and worse, disgust. I ended my testimony with the line I had rehearsed 100 times, a line that carried all the weight of my revenge. They thought they emptied my future, but in reality, they emptied their own. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Even before the judge spoke, the battle was already over. My parents had wanted to cripple me, but instead, they had exposed themselves. I still had my savings, my dream, my future intact. All they had left was the shame of knowing they had lost everything. And that was the true climax of my revenge. The verdict came down in my favor. The judge's words felt like both justice and closure. My parents were ordered to repay what they had taken, fined heavily for fraud, and placed under financial restrictions that stripped them of the power they once wielded so carelessly. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. For once, the truth stood taller than the lies, and I walked out of that courtroom knowing I had reclaimed not just my savings, but my dignity. But winning the case came with another decision, one heavier than any legal ruling. I had to face the reality that the bond with my parents was gone, burned down to ash. I thought about everything we had once shared: family dinners, childhood lessons, moments when I had believed their pride in me was genuine. Now, every memory carried the sting of betrayal. And so, I chose peace, not by forgiving them, not by pretending everything was fine, but to stay connected would mean reopening the wound over and over again. And I refused to let them have that power. With my hidden savings intact, I finally turned toward the dream that had always kept me going: my cafe. I rented a small but sunny spot on a corner street, one where the morning light streamed through wide glass windows. I painted the walls myself, set up tables with care, and crafted a menu that reflected years of planning. Every cup of coffee brewed, every pastry served felt like a piece of my life stitched back together. Customers began to come in, students with laptops, families enjoying breakfast, neighbors looking for a place that felt warm. My cafe wasn't just a business. It was proof that my resilience was stronger than their betrayal. When I stood behind the counter, greeting people, hearing laughter echo in the space I had built, I realized something important. The revenge had never really been about money. Money could be lost and earned again. What I had reclaimed was control over my own life, my right to shape my own future without anyone stealing it from me. My parents had birthed me, yes, but it was my strength, my persistence, my refusal to stay broken that had truly raised me into the person I had become. Now, when I think of them, there's no rage left, only distance. They live with their shame, their lost reputation, and the knowledge that they were the architects of their own downfall. I live with freedom, peace, and a business that is entirely my own. And as I close this chapter of my story, I leave one question for you.